Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy HP, and you're listening to the Unsportsmanlike Conduct podcast. This podcast is a sports podcast that's going to cover football, my beloved New York Giants, some baseball and basketball from time to time, and any other current events that are impacting our sports world. Before I get started, I want everyone to follow my Instagram page. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Again, that's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. I'll give you guys an agenda before I do get started. Episode 3 is going to cover the importance of this year's draft for the New York Giants. It's also going to cover my proposed draft strategy for the New York Giants and Dave Gettleman. I'm also going to be talking about Sterling Shepard re-signing with the New York Giants the 4-year, $41 million contract. And I'm also going to be talking about Adam Theilen recently signing a 4-year, $64 million contract with the Minnesota Vikings. And in talking about that, I'm going to discuss why that was a bad move by the Minnesota Vikings and why it doesn't make sense to give two receivers big contracts, given that they have other glaring weaknesses on that team. And then to end this podcast, I want to give some of my reactions to the first round of the playoff games that happened on Saturday and give my first round NBA playoff predictions. Let's get this episode started. So Dave Gettleman, if you're listening to this podcast or if anyone can reach Dave Gettleman, I want him to know that this is the most important NFL draft of your general manager career. You need to get this draft right. You want to know why you need to get this draft right? Because we are on the brinks of having Eli Manning leave and not having a successor for him. So in addition to not having a successor quarterback to Eli Manning, we have other weaknesses such as the defensive line and the secondary. And obviously with the trade of OBJ, wide receiver is now a little bit of a weakness as well. And then also the offensive line still needs help. That offensive line still needs some work. Even though there have been improvements made to it, there's still some additions that need to be made. So Dave Gettleman, how are you going to make this team better? We have so much draft capital this year. That's why this draft is very, very important. You need to make sure that you nail these picks so that we can find immediate impact franchise players that can lead this team for the next 5 to 10 years. For everyone, again, that doesn't know this, the New York Giants have 10 draft picks this year. 7 of those draft picks are coming from between rounds 1 and 4. That's very, very important because in an NFL draft, that's where all of the main good talent is. You draft your main core cornerstone players between rounds 1 and 4. So Dave Gettleman, you have to nail each of these picks. You have 7 picks between rounds 1 and 4. You have to nail it. Because Eli Manning's going to be gone, and so you're going to have to find a quarterback, right? So I don't know what your plan is for quarterback. I don't know if you think the guy is available in this draft, or you're going to wait till the end of the next offseason and you're going to sign a free agent quarterback like Russell Wilson. Whoever you think is ready to step in place of Eli needs to be able to come into a team that has pieces around him. I don't want a quarterback stepping in for Eli Manning, and we're still trying to rebuild, and we don't have the right pieces around him. And this includes the defense. Our defense needs to be good. We can't just have, Saquon Barkley, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, and then a quarterback and expect that our team's going to be competitive again. You need to rebuild this entire team. And don't get me wrong, I think Dave Gettleman is making moves where, it's sort of a combination of we're trying to remain competitive, somewhat competitive, but rebuilding at the same time, right? Which is why when we traded OBJ, we didn't trade OBJ for peanuts. We traded him for a stud safety, Jabril Peppers, a first-round pick, and a third-round pick. So that's why I think at the same time, while we are rebuilding, I think, Dave Gettleman and company are still trying to make this team as competitive as they can. But this draft is so important because for the first time in many, many years, there's going to be a transition. A legacy ends after next year. Most likely, Eli Manning will not be the starting quarterback in next year's NFL season for the New York Giants. So the next quarterback that comes in has to have the right pieces around him on offense, and this defense has to be ready to go. And Dave Gettleman's pretty good. Look, he's a pretty good general manager. And I mentioned this on my on the first episode. He came in as a GM for the Giants, and he saw the glaring weakness, which was offensive line. And he's built up our offensive line. It's getting there, man. We have Nate Soldier, Will Hernandez, John Halapio at center with the backup as Spencer Pulley, so we have some depth there. Kevin Zeitler, right guard. And again, I mentioned this on my first episode. We're a good right tackle away from having a solidified offensive line, which I think can be addressed in this NFL draft because we have so many draft picks. So I think David Gettleman did a great job there. He built the offensive line, and he said, you know what, I'm going to pick one of the best running backs in the draft that probably the NFL's ever seen in the last 5 years or so, and he picked up Saquon Barkley. He drafted Saquon Barkley. So we built the offensive line, and then we built up our run game. So David Gettleman's doing some pretty good things for the Giants. And he knows how to evaluate talent. For people who don't know Dave Gettleman's past, he sort of built that team for the Carolina Panthers that went to the Super Bowl. That was him. That was his reign. It was his selection, his talent evaluation that got that Carolina Panthers team to the Super Bowl. But the reason why this draft is so important is because we have so much draft capital. It's very clear, to me that this is where you can improve your team. To the point where not only do I think this coming season we can be competitive, but then in 2 years we can actually be playoff contenders. Not Super Bowl contenders, because that kind of really relies on how all the pieces come together and who our quarterback's going to be. But I really like this upcoming NFL draft. I think there's so much talent at a lot of these positions. I feel like this draft is more deep than a lot of other drafts in recent years. But Gettleman, you got to nail these picks. Because if you don't nail this draft, then that's what everybody's going to remember. Everyone's going to remember that you couldn't draft right for the New York Giants, and then they're going to harp on the fact that you traded our best offensive weapon in OBJ. This is where you make up for it to New York Giants fans. This is where you win back New York Giants fans' hearts. In Gettleman we trust, right? I've been saying that when Gettleman became the general manager for the Giants. In Gettleman we trust. It's your time, man. This is where you earn your money. This is where you earn the big bucks. Instill trust and confidence in your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are the season ticket holders of the New York Giants and every other New York Giants fans across the world. Because I'm sick and tired of wasting my Sunday watching a bad product. I'm sick and tired of it. Do you understand that that's 3 to 4 hours of my time on Sunday wasted because the New York Giants can't win? Because management year in and year out fails to put a good product out there? A lot of it isn't Gettleman's fault. Some of it was Jerry Reese's fault, the GM prior to Gettleman. But Gettleman, this is your time, man. You have 7 picks within rounds 1 through 4. And again, rounds 1 through 4 is where you find core talent. I don't give a damn what you do in 5, 6, 7. You can close your eyes and pick at random when you get through rounds 5, 6, and 7. I don't care what you do there. Rounds 1 through 4, you have to nail it. So a traditional NFL draft is 7 rounds. Each team gets 1 pick for each round. So everyone gets 7 picks in the NFL draft. And then teams trade away picks and acquire other picks, and then they get additional picks, which is what the New York Giants did. So what Dave Gettleman was able to achieve is he was able to get essentially a whole NFL draft worth of picks within the first four rounds. Which is why I think we're headed in the right direction, but we have to execute. I think Dave Gettleman had a plan all along, but he has to execute. This has to work out. Now I'm going to talk about what I think are our weaknesses and how they can be addressed in in this year's draft. So I think one of a big weakness for many years for the New York Giants was our defensive line. I thought overall our run defense wasn't so bad, but our pass rushing was terrible. We spent big money on JPP, we spent big money on Olivier Vernon, and we couldn't get to the quarterback. I want stud defensive ends who can rush the passer and get me 10 to 15 sacks a year. I want guys that every single play they're there in the backfield. They pin their ears back and get to the quarterback. I'm sick and tired of opposing team quarterbacks having 5 seconds to throw the ball. Quarterbacks shouldn't be having 5 seconds to throw the ball. This game is so quick. Within 3 seconds, my line, without the help of a freaking DB in the box, without the help of bringing in a linebacker, should be able to get to the quarterback. Snacks Harrison was our best defensive lineman over the last 3 years. But Snacks Harrison isn't a pass rusher. He's more of a run stopper. So that's why our run defense was pretty good until obviously we traded him. But our pass defense was horrible. Our pass rushing was horrible. And again, I said this before, Olivier Vernon fell off the screen. You know what? JPP did as well. But this is the time to address it. There are some stud pass rushers on this team in this year's NFL draft. You have Josh Allen. You have Montez Sweat. You can't go wrong with that. I think at number 6, the New York Giants should draft Montez Sweat, defensive end out of Mississippi State. I think he's a stud. He's very fast, has lateral quickness, and because of his quickness and he has a very long wingspan, he can also play outside linebacker too. And I'm one of those people that goes crazy over defensive players where you can line up anywhere on the field. That's why I was very high on the OBJ trade, because we got Jabril Peppers, who can be the safety that plays in the box and in coverage. It's very similar with Montez Sweat. He can line up as a defensive end or 3-4 outside linebacker and still be effective in both ways. He can rush the passer. He's very engaging. So I watched tape of him for a couple of games this past year. He's very engaging. He knows how to win battles early in the snap. And what I mean about winning battles early in the snap is, for a defensive end, the best defensive ends in the NFL win early. And what that means is when a quarterback calls the snap or calls the hike, right? Early in that down, that defensive end wins that battle between him and the left tackle or the right tackle, and that's why they're so successful in getting to the quarterback so quickly. Montez Sweat has the ability to do so because he's explosive, fast, and quick, but then he also has very long arms. He knows how to fight. It's a boxing match. That's what it is between a defensive line and an offensive line. It's essentially a boxing match. You have to use your arms. And Montez Sweat knows how to do that. I think he's going to be very successful for the New York Giants, and I hope the New York Giants get him. And again, this is assuming that Josh Allen won't be on the board. But I'm really high on Montez Sweat, and that's why I even mentioned him on my first episode. He's a very versatile defensive end, and I think he's a day one starter. And that's the thing that you want to do. You don't want to draft these players that are projects per se. You want to draft day one starters, and I think Montez Sweat is a day one starter. He'll come in and have an immediate impact. I think in his rookie year, he may have 8. He can get us 8 sacks. I'm okay with that for a rookie. And he has lateral quickness, So that's going to help out in the run game as well. You want to have a defensive end who can get off the line and move side to side. And Montez Sweat knows how to do that. Because he's not this over-the-top big-body defensive end. He's just the right size where he can move side to side and north to south. I think he's going to have a very successful career, and I really, really hope the New York Giants draft him with 6th overall pick. The New York Giants don't get to the quarterback. This is where you can draft a pass rusher. Focus on the defense with your first pick. Because, if you guys look at our defense, we're very slim on defensive backs. We have Janoris Jenkins, who's hitting the wrong side of 30. Jabril Peppers is a safety, so we can't really rely on him to make too many plays. In terms of within pass coverage, and then we don't have any other cornerback. We don't have cornerbacks that I don't even know what our depth chart looks like. Our secondary looks horrendous at this point. But the best way to take pressure off your secondary is to get pressure on the quarterback, because then that gives the secondary less time to defend receivers. The quicker your defensive line can get to the quarterback, the shorter amount of time receivers have to get open, to complete their route trees. And that's very, very important in today's game, because in today's game, quarterbacks are taking dropping 3 steps back and land the ball sling. A lot of these drag routes and slant routes, right? And teams are steadily moving the ball down the field, and then they go for that one big play. But you know what I mean? We have all these 5, 6, 7, 10-yard completions, and then eventually a team tries to open up the field by letting the ball fire, maybe on a go route or so. But I think our DBs are going to get crushed this year. And so I think a way to take pressure off of them is by by solidifying this defensive line by drafting a premier pass rusher. And our defensive line will look pretty good, because then we'll have Montez Sweat, Davin Tomlinson, B.J. Hill. I mean, those are 2 studs as well. So I think if we can get a decent edge rusher, we might be in good shape. And then, as most of you know, we also picked number 17 in the NFL draft as well, which is still in the first round. We got the 17th pick with the trade where we traded Odell Beckham to the Browns. And I think this is where you address the missing Odell Beckham. This is where you can address it. As I said on the first episode, draft A.J. Brown. And the reason why I've been reading a lot, I've been looking through Instagram, kind of looking through these online blogs, and some people want the New York Giants to use both picks to address the defense. But I really think at number 17 we should draft a wide receiver and we should get A.J. Brown. And the reason why I think that is because, look, we have Sterling Shepard, we have Evan Ingram, and then we have Golden Tate. But Golden Tate is a short-term solution. Who knows how long Golden Tate really has in the NFL? I don't think Golden Tate has that many more good years left. So that's why I'm a little afraid to rely on him as another option, as another receiving option. And I think this is where you can address that vacancy. Draft A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, he's such an explosive wide receiver, and he can line up anywhere. People think he's undersized, but Odell Beckham was quote unquote undersized, and we lined him up anywhere. We put him in the slot. We put him wide right, wide left. He knew how to get open. A.J. Brown is an explosive receiver, and he's a great route runner. He knows how to get in, and the way he moves in and out within his routes is really it's amazing. There was so much hype over his teammate DK Metcalf, but I think DK Metcalf is probably going to be I don't want to even say a bust, but he's not worth the first round pick. I think a lot of teams are high on him, but he's not worth the first round pick because DK Metcalf can't run routes. He can just run a go route. He had a great combine, and so all these NFL scouts and all these panelists on ESPN and the NFL Network went crazy because he had such an amazing combine. But Personally, I think teams should steer away from freak athletes and look for players who have pure skill. And A.J. Brown has pure skill. On my last episode, I talked about how the game is changing where, you want your tight end and your slot receivers to expose the defense. Very rarely are teams sort of relying on a big body receiver on the outside to break open the secondary. Imagine having Sterling Shepard in the slot on the right and then A.J. Brown on the left, and then Evan Ingram lining right next to the left tackle or the right tackle. You know how much pressure that's going to put on linebackers? If we draft A.J. Brown and couple him with Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram, I think teams may be forced to run nickel packages against us. And so what a nickel package means, folks, for those of you who don't know what it is, in a nickel package, you have one less linebacker and you have one extra defensive back. And then when teams start to run nickel packages, well, what do we have? We have Saquon Barkley in the backfield ready to run. And I think we're poised to be very successful in doing that because Gettleman is building an offensive line. He's almost there. I think we're about like I would say 3/5 of our line is solid players. I think we can exploit defenses very, very well. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, wait, we had OBJ. Why couldn't we do that with OBJ? I think we were getting there. This is, Eli Manning's had so many coordinators throughout the last couple of years, a change in schemes, and I think Pat Shurmur was finally able to get Eli rolling towards the end of the year, and this was actually without Beckham. We're scoring 20, 25 plus points the last 4 games. And this was the first year where we were, our offensive line was building. This is the year where our offensive line was learning how to, finally just like kind of block both in the pass and the run game. And this was the first year in a very long time where we had a legitimate running back, and that was Saquon Barkley. Year 2, Saquon. Year 2 with an improved line. And you bring in A.J. Brown, who again is a day 1 starter. I think the potential for this team, I think will be a force to reckon with. I think Pat Shurmur, I think he's an offensive mastermind. I think he knows how to use the talent around him. I think it's just the first year jitters. Just kind of getting used to it, learning all the personnel, and then just like the whole, he was in New York dealing with the media and stuff like that. I thought there was a lot of pressure, but I think, he got that first year under his belt, and I think year 2 is going to be a pretty good year. And Sterling Shepard just re-signed a contract. So now hey, Sterling Shepard is motivated. Sterling Shepard, you kept Sterling Shepard happy. Sterling Shepard was posting on Instagram how happy he was to re-sign with the Giants organization. And that's a good sign, right? That's one less player you have to worry about coming into the season. That's one less, headline, one less story, right? You want to keep your best players happy, and I thought that was a good deal. I thought that was a great signing by Dave Gettleman. I'm glad that he did that. I'm glad he took care of that this offseason rather than, the anxiety of heading into the next offseason where, we let him walk or there's disputes of whether Dave Gettleman wants to franchise tag him or not. I mean, look, we let Landon Collins walk and we've got nothing out of him. So because of that, with the re-signing of Sterling Shepard, I think Evan Ingram's also going to have a big year with OBJ gone. And then if we can get a young stud wide receiver in this draft, again, A.J. Brown, then I think this offense is going to do better than a lot of people are giving credit for. And then with the second round pick, and, I'll be honest, I don't want the Giants to pick a quarterback this year. Or I don't want them to pick a quarterback too early in the draft, but I know that they will. So because I know that they will, I'm sort of going to cater my draft strategy to that, to what I think Dave Gettleman wants to accomplish in this year's draft. So with round number 2, I would get Daniel Jones, quarterback out of Duke. I think Daniel Jones is a good quarterback. He's good with the short to intermediate routes. He's good, and not only is he, in terms of like letting the ball go quickly and accuracy wise, but he goes through his progressions really well. But my only knock on him is that he's not that great with the deep routes, and he's not that great with going through progressions on routes that take longer to progress, which are those longer routes, right? That go sort of go 15, 20 yards out. That's where he struggles a bit, and he tends to let the ball let the ball go out quicker than he should because he doesn't let those deep routes progress as much as he should. And I think that's but I think that's fixable. I think that just sort of comes down to coaching and experience, right? I mean, I think you become better progressing, going through your progressions as you start to get more better, as you get coached, because that comes down to coaching and sort of consistent film watching, right? As you continue to watch film, you see how things open up in the field, and I think Daniel Jones can get better at that. Daniel Jones has decent arm strength. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's a rocket arm, but I think he can make the throws. The same thing with Eli Manning. Eli Manning doesn't have like the greatest arm, but he can make almost every throw. And I think maybe that's where the comparison might be. But rather, I mean, the only thing is, though, Daniel Jones, the way that offense was set up, Daniel Jones wasn't really a gunslinger per se. I consider Eli Manning a gunslinger, which is why he has so many interceptions as he does, because he takes so many chances. But I would say Daniel Jones is good enough to be a game manager, and he's a competent enough quarterback to help win any NFL team a game, some games. And I would compare Daniel Jones more to an Alex Smith rather than an Eli Manning. I don't really like the Eli Manning comparison because, we've seen time and time again where Eli was forced to be, the gunslinger, to drive the ball down the field because the New York Giants haven't had a decent run game in the past 5-6 years. Right? It wasn't up until last year where we drafted Saquon Barkley and our offensive line at the second half of the year finally, put it together. So, yeah, again, not too crazy on that comparison. I mean, I get it that they had this, I think, the same quarterback coach, I believe, but not too crazy on that comparison. But nevertheless, I think Daniel Jones is a good quarterback, and I think at round 2, why not? Right? Let him learn a year under Eli Manning, and then by, his second year, he can come in and he'll be ready to go. Again, if it were me, I wouldn't draft a quarterback too early because I'd rather use rounds 1 through 3 to build up this team, build up the offense, build up the defense, so that next year when we want a quarterback, we can either draft one or we can sign Russell Wilson because we all know Russell Wilson wants to come to New York. It's just my concern is I don't want a quarterback to come in and start right away and then there's no pieces around him and that the team from both sides of the ball aren't built up enough to help win games or execute every Sunday. That's why, if it were me, I would use rounds 1 through 4 to focus on, defensive line, secondary, and then wide receiver wherever you can get it. But, I think Daniel Jones is going to be a good NFL quarterback. I don't think he'll necessarily be a bust. I don't think he'll be a, premier Pro Bowler or anything, or an All-Pro quarterback, but I think he might have a couple of Pro Bowls under his belt. I think he'll win some games in the NFL, whether that's with the New York Giants or any other NFL team. Because I think he's a smart quarterback. He knows how to go through his progressions. And I think as long as you know how to do that, you can work on other things. Like I mentioned, his progressions when it comes to deep routes is something that he struggles with. And his deep throw accuracy isn't that great, but I think that's something that he can work with because he has the other tools. And also, if you think about it, I mean, today's NFL offenses, they aren't really meant to you're not really throwing deep too many times. A lot of these offenses want to gradually get first downs with a mixture of short to intermediate pass plays and then running plays. Because the whole point of it is, hey, let's try to get as many first downs as we can while trying to burn as much clock as we can. So we give the other team less time to go down the field and score. So that's why, I mean, granted, look, Daniel Jones may not be the greatest deep ball thrower, but I don't think he even needs to be successful in the NFL. And I think a good example of that is Alex Smith. Right, once Alex Smith got a solidified, offensive system around him and coaches that actually, utilized his skill set, Alex Smith was pretty successful. So yes, at number 2, I would take Daniel Jones. because I think I think the New York Giants are in love with them, and I think they do want to find Eli Manning's replacement. So I think you would do that at round 2. At round 3 is where I would address the secondary. I think our secondary is shot. I'm a little worried about Janoris Jenkins. He's on the wrong side of 30. And look, ever since he's been a New York Giant, he's had pretty good seasons. He's been a pretty good cornerback, but sometimes you don't see the regression of a player until the regression actually happens. And sometimes that regression can be really, really bad. And I'm just afraid of, I don't want Janoris Jenkins to be another Corey Webster. And what I mean by that is, so Corey Webster used to be a cornerback for the New York Giants several years ago. And Corey Webster was a great cornerback. And I forgot what year it was, but I think it was probably the 2012 or 2013 NFL season. Corey Webster just completely regressed. He was getting beat on every route. He let up so many big plays, and it shocked me. And this was, about 6 years ago? So I was like at 18, 19 years old, and I'm like, wait, what's going on? Corey Webster used to be really good. Like, why is he giving up so many plays? And then I realized, wow, yeah, well, he was on the wrong side of 30. And sometimes, especially in the NFL, where your body just takes so much of a beating, no matter what position you are, except for like a kicker or punter, like you don't see that stuff coming. And these receivers are getting faster, more explosive, and the route runnings are becoming more exotic. I just hope that Janoris Jenkins, can hold up at least one more year. But because I know that Janoris Jenkins' shelf life is not that much longer, we need to find a cornerback that can help our defense immediately. And so with the third round pick, I would take the cornerback from Clemson, Trayvon Mullen. Trayvon Mullen is 6'2", big body cornerbacks. For those of you who I've talked to about football very, very closely with, I think you guys, they would tell you that I love cornerbacks. Cornerbacks are my favorite position in the NFL. I think that's the most exciting position to watch. I can watch cornerbacks follow and defend receivers all day. I think it's actually an art to be able to defend someone across the line that's so fast, and you have to be able to predict where that receiver is going to run, how they're going to run. Right, and honestly, the way cornerbacks predict how a receiver is going to run is they have to keep their eye on their hips and shoulders. Basically, from the hips and shoulders, a cornerback has to predict, okay, is this person going to do a slant route, or are they going to keep running up, or is this going to be a drag route? And the fact that they have to sort of read that as the snap's going, to me, is completely amazing. But yes, Trayvon Mullen should go in the third round to the New York Giants. I think he's a day 2 guy. I don't think he goes in the first round. Trayvon Mullen is 6'2", has a good wingspan. I always like the big body cornerbacks because they can get physical and disrupt you at the line of scrimmage. I don't like these scrawny cornerbacks what someone that comes to mind is the guy from Tampa Bay, Vernon. I forgot his last name, but he got drafted a couple of years ago. And, these small cornerbacks just can't get physical enough to disrupt receivers or tight ends at the line. I think Trayvon Mullen has the capability to do so. Also, I was watching tape on Trayvon Mullen as well, and he can stay step to step with receivers. I saw him on defending drag routes, slant routes, in routes, even go routes, and he was there. He was usually there on every play. My only knock on him, and which is why I think he's going to go in the third round, is that he doesn't have the discipline when it comes to more complex routes. And so let's say on a hitch route, I just feel like he bites too much. On those comeback routes, he bites too much. And that's very, very, you have to know how to defend that route because that's a very common route in the NFL. A lot of these fast guys, they come out of the break going really, really fast up the field 10 yards to make you think that they're going to do a go route, but then they really just turn back around. And, that play is done so many times because, again, today's NFL offenses, they're not designed to go deep anymore. It's very just short to intermediate routes. And so I saw Trayvon Mullen just biting on so many fakes, so many I think he's just very, very, he's a little too aggressive and not disciplined enough. And I think in his rookie year, he's going to get burned. he's definitely going to get burned because these receivers all these receivers are just so good at route running now. It's not like the old days before, It's like a guy like Des Bryant was, back in the day, right? Like several years ago, was so successful because he was this big body receiver. He didn't have to run complex routes. So, a guy like that, I think Trayvon Mullen would be able to defend, like a big body receiver. But I think he's gonna, he's gonna have to learn how to be more disciplined and not bite on those more complex routes. But what's a plus side is the fact that he can stay step for step with receivers on drag routes, on go routes, slant routes. So that to me was a good sign. I'm like, okay, like if I'd rather that. And a good thing was, even when he would bite early in the receiver's route progression, he had good makeup speed for it. So he's a pretty fast corner. I think his 40 time was low 4.4s. And I compared his 40 time to the other top 10 cornerbacks. I think the list was from Pro Football Focus, I believe, the top 10 cornerbacks. And all the other cornerbacks had high 4.4s, 4.5s, mid 4.5s. So Trayvon Mullen's a pretty fast cornerback, and that's why I think he had such great recovery speed, even when he did bite too early on the receivers' routes. So I think that would be a great pick at number 3. We do need some we do need youth at the in our secondary. And I think as of right now, look, we have an aging Janoris Jenkins, and then we have Jabril Peppers to really rely on. And then I think, this year, even if we get Trayvon Mullen, I don't think that secondary gets that much better. But I think it's still a good pick because, you're building up your secondary with drafting Trayvon Mullen. But I think this year Giants fans should expect to give up very big plays, a lot of yards after the catch, because we run a 3-4. So we have an extra linebacker in there. So, I mean, it's going to be tricky. I'd like to see what Bettcher's going to do in terms of a coverage standpoint, because having 4 linebackers out there with being slim at secondary concerns me when it's going to come to those pass plays. And so I wanted to give a detailed sort of mock draft, if you will, between rounds 1 to 3, and sort of recap. In round 1 with the number 6 pick, we get Montez Sweat, defensive end, pass rusher from Mississippi State. At pick number 17, we get wide receiver A.J. Brown from Ole Miss. And then with the second round pick, we get quarterback out of Duke, Daniel Jones. And then with the third round pick, we get the cornerback, Trayvon Mullins from Clemson University. And then in the 4th round, we have 3 picks in the 4th round. I would honestly, with 2 of those picks, you get an offensive line, and then with the other pick, get another cornerback. Because I think with offensive line, I know like people like to take offensive line early in drafts, but me personally, I think it's easier to find offensive line anywhere. I feel like offensive line talent is a little more easier to find deep in the mid and deep rounds, similar to running backs. Rather, like you don't really need to go too early on offensive linemen. So I wouldn't even mind if all 3 picks in the 4th round were offensive line. I would be okay with that because you would think that at least one of them hits, one of them will work out. And then 5, 6, and 7, man, I can care less. I can really care less at that point. That's where you draft, where you think you can add some depth to your team. And as I mentioned, earlier on at the top of the episode, I did want to give just my thoughts on the Sterling Shepard contract extension. So Sterling Shepard recently signed a 4-year, $41 million contract with the New York Giants. Kudos to Dave Gettleman for getting that done now rather than waiting in the middle of the season or, at the onset of next offseason, with the potential of maybe letting him walk. Maybe Sterling Shepard doesn't want to sign a franchise tag, similar to the issues with Landon Collins. So I'm really, really glad that he did that. And, after signing that extension, Sterling Shepard came out with this quote, which is, definitely instills confidence in me and should with the rest of the New York Giants. He said, end quote, "I'm ready. With Odell going down the last 2 seasons, that time definitely helped me get a grasp of what being a leader is all about and being that lead guy in the locker room." So that's definitely something positive that you want to hear from, someone who's potentially going to be your lead receiver coming this season. So I look forward to him being having career stats, obviously being a 1,000-yard receiver. I look forward to him and Evan Ingram playing off of one another and just having great seasons overall. So, good stuff by Dave Gettleman and the New York Giants. I think that was a move that the New York Giants were, I think New York Giants fans are happy about and, can kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, cool. He at least looks like Dave Gettleman does know what he's doing. So, thanks. Good move. Thank you, Gettleman, because now, we have some of our core receivers still intact. And we can just build off around it by drafting, hopefully, A.J. Brown. Another thing I want to talk about and spend some time on is the Adam Theilen contract extension with the Minnesota Vikings. He signed a 4-year, $62 million contract. If I were the Minnesota Vikings, I probably wouldn't have done that. And the reason why is because I wouldn't want to pay 2 wide receivers such big money. The Minnesota Vikings are also paying Stephon Diggs. Look, folks, you do not need to pay 2 receivers that much money to win a Super Bowl. You do not need 2 all-star stud receivers on your team to win championships. Let's look at the recent history of our Super Bowl winners. The New England Patriots, Philadelphia Eagles, right? We had the Seattle Seahawks at one point, the Baltimore Ravens, the Denver Broncos. Those guys didn't, when the Denver Broncos, when the Denver Broncos won the Super Bowl, yeah, they had Demaryius Thomas, but they won in spite of their pass game. They won because of their defense and the run game. Not to mention, the Carolina Panthers played the Broncos that year, and the Carolina Panthers didn't have a superstar stud receiver either. They just had good, competent receivers. When Seattle beat Denver to win the Super Bowl, they won because of their defense, because Peyton Manning played like crap that year. And then when the 49ers lost to the Baltimore Ravens, look, they still made it to the Super Bowl. They didn't need good receivers either. The 49ers didn't have all-star stud receivers either that year. I think with maybe the exception of New England, because I think Edelman is low-key a top 10 wide receiver. And obviously, they had Gronk, but Gronk was always hurt, right? And then the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Alshon Jeffrey was their best wide receiver when they won the Super Bowl. Alshon Jeffrey had a great game, but Alshon Jeffrey is not a superstar wide receiver. He's not an Odell Beckham. I wouldn't put Alshon Jeffrey in Adam Thielen's class or even Stephon Diggs' class. I just don't think it makes sense to give 2 wide receivers big contract money, especially when your offensive line is one of your big weaknesses. They had one of the worst offensive lines this year. And because of that, they don't have a great running game. They didn't have a great running game, and Kirk Cousins didn't have the greatest year. What a bad way to open up your first year with the new team. They could have used that money bolstering up that offensive line. Who knows? Maybe they think they can address that in the draft. So we'll see how that plans out. But again, I just, paying big money on position players doesn't always work out, and we've seen that. Over the last 10 years, we've seen who our Super Bowl winners were, and these teams were well-balanced, well-coached teams. So I think the Minnesota Vikings will eventually regret giving Adam Thielen that big contract. You had to decide a couple of years ago, you had to make a decision. Are we going to keep Adam Thielen or are we going to keep Stephon Diggs? But the fact that they decided to keep both really doesn't really make sense to me. That's a big contract, 4 years, $60 million. I don't know. We'll see how that works out. And that about ends the football segment for today. I do want to talk about my first-round NBA playoff predictions. I usually don't follow the NBA too much during the regular season because, I'll be honest, I think the NBA is just a little boring. We always know what's going to happen, what teams are going to make it to the playoffs, what teams are probably going to make it to the finals. And so it kind of got watered down for me, right? I stopped following it as extensively as I used to. But yeah, so I'm just looking at these matchups, really, really good matchups. And I mentioned on my last episode, I think we're going to see a lot of 6 and 7 game series. Yesterday we saw 2 upsets. The Nets beat the 76ers, and the Magic beat the Toronto Raptors. Right? Both teams, underdog teams, winning the first away game That's very, very big. And now the pressure is both on the 76ers and the Toronto Raptors. Right? I mean, the 76ers have to win the next game. The Toronto Raptors have to win the next game. And the thing about the 76ers, their core is a young core. They haven't been successful. Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, they haven't been successful enough to withstand those boos that they were getting yesterday. Right? So it'll be very interesting to see how they bounce back. At one point, in the middle of the second quarter, I actually have the stats in front of me. Joel Embiid was 1 for 9 with 6 minutes left in the second half. In the first half, excuse me. Ben Simmons was 1 for 4. Jimmy Butler was 1 for 3. How is it that your best shot maker only took 3 shots? How is it that 3 of those players at the 6-minute mark only made 1 shot each? Joel Embiid, unfortunately, went to the free throw line a lot because at that point he had 11 points. And he was close to a double-double with 7 rebounds, so he was being a little bit of effective. But make no mistake, the Nets, they have some studs that can play. Ed Davis is a pretty good defender. And the biggest issue with the 76ers is that their main ball handler, Ben Simmons, doesn't have a jump shot. Whereas on the other side of the court with the Nets, D'Angelo Russell does. So it's just hard to combat that. Again, they got to get Jimmy Butler going early. I think that's what the thing is. And I'm looking at it now. He had 1 personal foul. So it wasn't like he was in foul trouble all game. I think they were just out of their rhythm. I don't think they got into the right groove. And I think that's why they got dominated. The Nets looked really, really good. And that's what's so exciting about this year's playoffs, because you don't have these super stacked teams or overwhelming favorite like when LeBron was on the Heat several years ago, and then when LeBron went to the Cavaliers and they had those super teams. We're seeing less and less of that now because LeBron went to the Western Conference. And that's why we're just seeing competitive games in the playoffs. It reminds me of when I first fell in love with basketball. This podcast is a football and New York Giants dedicated podcast. But I swear to you, the first sport I fell in love with was basketball. I used to have a garbage can in my front porch, and me and my friends would use that garbage can as a basketball hoop. And then me and my friends put in money together to buy a hoop for literally the whole block. So the whole block would come to my backyard then, and we would all play basketball in my backyard. Like, basketball was the first sport I ever fell in love with. And I'm a LeBron fan, but he kind of ruined the NBA for me because it just became less competitive with all these super teams. And there's a difference between the way the Golden State Warriors built their super team by drafting organically, rather where you see clear collusion going on and everyone is purposely trying to not re-sign with their teams so that they can go play with one another. That's what sort of ruined the competitiveness of it all. And so yesterday we saw 2 upsets. And both good games, right? Because the Sixers came back. The Sixers were coming back. I think at one point, they trailed double digits and then they made it close to 2 points. So they were coming back. So, it was just very exciting basketball to see yesterday. And then even that Magic and Toronto game, DJ Augustine, I mean, who would have thought that would be the guy that would be the leading scorer for the Magic in a round 1 away playoff in Toronto against Kawhi Leonard and company? It was just awesome to see that game winner 3. It was just so cool to see. I was at a bar with my buddies, and we were actually playing darts. And I'm like, hold on, wait, I got to see this last play. I'm not going to go. You guys have to wait for my turn. I'm not going to go. I want to see this last play. And thankfully, I waited for the right reason because it was a game-winning 3. It's just great basketball yesterday. I didn't catch the other 2 games because, honestly, I'm not interested in watching the Warriors play until probably the second round. I think they're going to sweep the Clippers. The Clippers were a well-balanced team for the regular season, but they don't have enough firepower for the Golden State Warriors. And everyone knows that, right? I'm not a genius. There's just too much firepower on that. They're making a big story of Patrick Beverley, getting under KD's skin, and they both getting ejected. Who gives a shit? The Clippers are not going to win. Give it a break. Non-story. Move on ESPN. Move on Fox. But, yeah, great basketball again. I was very shocked that Kawhi Leonard, I think he went 0 for 7. How do you only take 7 shots? You're the point guard of the team, man. You're a scoring point guard. Put the ball on the floor. Drive. You have DJ Augustine on the other end. That's the guy that's stopping you? Drive and kick. You got wing players on that team. That Toronto Raptors team is pretty deep. Kawhi Leonard had a heck of a game. He was balling, man. But come on, Lowry, you're the second man. You're his Robin. You got to score more points, man. And it's my issue with that is come on, Lowry, you've been to the playoffs before. You're the overwhelming favorite. The Magic weren't. Honestly, I didn't think the Magic would win a game. Because the thing with the playoffs is, it's different with football. With football, your whole team has to be firing on all cylinders to win in the playoffs. In the NBA, you just need to be competitive enough where when it gets down to the wire, you can rely on that one guy to take you home. The LeBron James of the world, the Kobe Bryants, the James Hardens, the Russell Westbrooks, the Paul George, the Steph Currys, Kevin Durant's. Those guys will take you home when it comes down to it, right? When it comes down to the end of the games, they will lead your team. And that's what basketball's always been about. Except for college ball. College ball is a little different, right? Where the whole team has to be, get involved. With NBA basketball, you can literally let one guy just lead your team. So it was just very, very disappointing, man. You played 34 minutes and you couldn't score a freaking point. And, I was reading on Instagram, this guy said, hey, this is the first time without DeMar DeRozan, so that's why he struggled. That is some bullshit. Okay, he is a professional getting paid millions of dollars. 0 for 7. How long has he been in the league? I mean, give me a break. If he was a rookie, I'd give him some, I'd understand. But nevertheless, I still have Toronto Raptors winning that series. That should probably be a 5-game series. But look, how great is that, right? Just competitive basketball. 2 upsets. And you can even count 3 because the Spurs beat the Nuggets. But that was a late game. There was no... that's going to be a good series, too. Spurs and Nuggets. But that was just way too late for me to catch. I think I went to bed by, by 10, and that game started at 10:30. But, yeah, I want to give my first-round predictions. So we'll start with the Milwaukee Brewers and the Detroit Pistons matchup. I have Milwaukee winning that in 5 games. Giannis, he's on a roll, man. And that team is deep. Chris Middleton, Eric Bledsoe. That team can ball, man. That team is deep. They're very well coached. And then just overall, both great on both offense and the defensive end of the ball. And it all comes down to firepower. Look, the Pistons' best player is Blake Griffin. Your big man shouldn't be your best player, not in today's game. And I know Blake Griffin can put the ball on the floor. I know he can go to the top of the key, put the ball on the floor, drive, and even sort of create his own shot at times. But, your power forward or your center shouldn't be your best guy. Your wing player or your point guard should be your best player in any offense. So I don't expect the Pistons to win that many games. I see that series going 5 games to Milwaukee. The Celtics and Pacers. So as I was recording this, I got an alert that the Celtics had won Game 1. Again, I have the Celtics winning that too. The Indiana Pacers are a very good team. Don't get me wrong. They're a very defensively sound team. And that's very indicative of a Nate McMillan Nate McMillan ran team. Nate McMillan's always been a defensive-minded coach. I've always been a big fan of his going back to Portland. But again, it just comes down to, firepower, right? This Boston Celtics team is so deep with guys who can put up 10 to 15, then 15 to 20 points a game at any moment, right? Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, obviously Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward, Al Horford. I just think, Terry Rozier, this team is deep. right? They're all good players that they all can create their own shot. That's the greatest thing. That's the really good thing about this team. I know they struggled throughout the year to win games, and that's why they were a 4th seed, where they should have been at least a 3rd or 2nd seed. I'm surprised they weren't first, but I get it. They just struggled throughout the year, and Milwaukee just had a fantastic year. But I think being the 4th seed, that was a fluke, and it will actually work in the Celtics' favor. Because I honestly have the Celtics either sweeping the Indiana Pacers, or that series will probably go to 5 games as well. And then the 76ers and the Nets just recently talked about it. Look, I think the 76ers are going to win that matchup. Because we've seen time and time again, look, the Nets have a recipe where they say, hey, Russell, could you just go out and you're going to dribble the ball, you're going to milk the clock, you're going to try to create your own shot or find the open guy. And I don't think that works. That never works. The 76ers are a bit more deep of a team, and I think they'll figure it out. But I think, hopefully Joel Embiid's not hurt. I don't know if his knee was bothering him yesterday, which is why he struggled. But if Joel Embiid is healthy, I think this matchup ends up going to 6 or 7 games. I think this is the one that goes to 6 and 7 games to the 76ers. Toronto and the Magic, I have that going to 5. I have that going to a 6-game series as well. I think the Magic will lose the next game. It'll be tied 1-1, and then when they go back to Orlando, I see them splitting that again. So again, I think that series will probably go to 6 games. And so that's the Eastern Conference, and then the Western Conference. So Golden State Warriors, Los Angeles Clippers. Again, I said it before. That's a clean sweep. 4 games easy. Last night's game was a blowout. I picture every game to be a blowout, besides maybe the second game. I'm sorry, the third game, which would be the first game where the Los Angeles Clippers are home. I think that would be the game where that's probably more highly contested. But other than that, I think every other game would probably be a blowout. They just don't have enough to compete. I think it's a clean sweep again. I don't see the Clippers being competitive at all, except for that first game that they go back home to. Rockets and Jazz, this is going to be a fun matchup, man. I want to see punch for punch, pound for pound. Donovan Mitchell versus James Harden. I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to see just 2 players having 25, 30-point games, having explosive, amazing plays. I mean, that series within itself is a highlight reel. And I can't wait to see that. I think that series goes to 6 games as well. Chris Paul is finally getting healthy in his back, so I have the Rockets winning that. Clint Capella is healthy again. And that core 3 in addition to Eric Gordon, that's a nice little nucleus. And I think the Rockets, are one of the better teams despite their their being the 4th seed. I think that they have a fighter's chance against every other team that's seated above them, including the Portland Trailblazers, the Denver Nuggets, and the Golden State Warriors. So, yeah, I mean, I have the Rockets winning that in about 6 games. I think that's going to be a tough one. I think Donovan Mitchell will end up winning the Jazz a couple of games just by having a crazy 30, 40-point games. Portland Blazers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. I had the Thunder winning that. I don't know what the score is now. I think the Portland Trailblazers might be up right now. Hold on. I'll actually check that as I'm recording this. Let's see. Just a moment. Okay, almost there, guys. Okay, so it's actually final. The Trailblazers won 104-99. I expected them to win the first game because they were home. The Thunder were 6th seed, right? This is a 3 versus 6 matchup. I do have the Thunder winning just because I think the Thunder are just a better team overall, right? Paul George, Russell Westbrook, and then they have Adams at center. Steven Adams is having a career year. He's almost averaging a double-double. I think he's going to, he actually had a good playoff. He actually had a good playoff game too, right? 17 points, 9 rebounds. Paul George had 26 and 10, but it looks like he got into foul trouble because he ended the game with 6 fouls. So he looked like he got thrown out of the game. Russell Westbrook was in foul trouble as well. I mean, that's an exciting matchup too. Westbrook versus Damian Lillard. I mean, who doesn't want to watch that, right? I mean, that's just a great matchup. You know, the Trailblazers have good guards. They have an excellent backcourt, right? C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard. And I think they have good pieces everywhere around them as well, and a pretty decent bench, which is why I think this series goes to 7 games. I think this is going to be a competitive series, but I think I just have my money on Russell Westbrook and Paul George over Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum. So I think that's where that series goes. I think it goes 7 games to the Thunder, and that'll be interesting because at the game 7, you know, they're going to be away. They would be at Portland. And then last but not least, Denver versus San Antonio. You know, this one's a tough one. You know, I was thinking about this for a while, but it's weird. Even though the San Antonio Spurs were the 7th seed, and the Denver Nuggets had an amazing year and such a deep team with great guards and Djokovic, obviously. But I just think the San Antonio Spurs aren't that off. I don't think they're that bad of a team. They have DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, LaMarcus Aldridge, and then ultimately, you know, I'm going to bet my money on Greg Popovich to find a way to get out of that series. And they did win last night, which was no surprise. And again, this puts pressure on a very young Denver Nuggets team to win the next game, which I don't know if they're up to that task. So that's going to be a good series too. I think that goes to the Spurs in 6 games. I think Denver loses game 2. And then they'll probably, I think they get their first win in game 3. Yeah, but I see this going into game 6. But again, this team is very, very young. It's probably one of the more younger teams in the Western Conference. So I wouldn't even be surprised if that's a sweep. Because Greg Popovich is such a genius, right? And then like, it's not like the Spurs don't have any talent versus like offensive talent, that is, right? Versus like the Indiana Pacers or the Orlando Magic. Like the Spurs have players that can put the ball on the floor and score. So I have the Spurs winning that series as well. So, and I only want to do a round-by-round prediction. So we'll see how this first round goes. And then when we get into the second round, I'm going to do a prediction then, and then the conference finals and the finals. I don't want to just predict who's going to make it to the NBA Finals because things change. Players get hurt. One team gets hotter than the other. So I kind of want to take this round by round and evaluate each team and then go from there. So every time a round ends, I'll definitely be giving my predictions. And that wraps it up, guys. This is the episode 3 for Unsportsmanlike Conduct. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining and viewing this episode. I really do appreciate it. Please subscribe to the YouTube page. And also, please follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Until next time.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.